Have you ever imagined being torn away from the only place you call home, bearing the weight of an endless judgment? That's exactly what happened to Melisa, a 14-year-old girl who was expelled from her home after revealing she was pregnant. For her parents, preserving the family's honor mattered more than embracing her in such a vulnerable moment. But what seemed like the end of everything was, in fact, the beginning of a transformation no one could have foreseen. Years later, Melisa returned, not as the rejected teenager, but as a strong, determined woman with a story that defies all expectations. She not only overcame the dangers and accusations that surrounded her, but also built something extraordinary, challenging every reproachful glance cast her way. What happened during those years of absence? How did someone rejected so early in life manage to rise again, and more than that, surprise everyone around her? This is a story about resilience, about rewriting destinies, and perhaps, about a love that never truly disappeared, even in the most resistant hearts. Get ready to discover how life's hardest lessons can be transformed into strength, and how Melisa shocked the world by proving her worth was never defined by the judgment she received. At 14, Melisa watched her world crumble in ways few can imagine. After confessing she was pregnant, her parents' gaze shifted from tenderness to severity. It was as if every happy memory was replaced by a cruel judgment. Family honor above all else, they said, as they silently packed her belongings. The weight of their accusations was heavier than any suitcase Melisa could carry. The early morning felt colder than ever when Melisa was left at the door of her late great-aunt's empty house. A teenager, alone, pregnant, unable to understand why love and compassion felt so distant in that moment. It was then that she learned a painful truth: sometimes, the very people who should protect you are the first to turn their backs. How many Melisas are out there, wondering what they did to deserve such rejection? But life doesn't end with a period, and Melisa knew this deep down. Amid the tears, an inner voice whispered that despair wouldn't be her final destination. Finding strength where only fear resides is a feat few achieve, but she decided to try. One step at a time, even without knowing the direction, was enough to begin. After all, giving up was a choice, and Melisa was determined not to make it. During her first week alone, Melisa found an old note from her great-aunt, with a phrase that seemed written for that very moment: "The most beautiful things grow out of chaos." She reread it so many times that it felt as though she could hear the elderly woman's voice beside her. Among the shards of her reality, she decided her story would be like one of those flowers that bloom in the most unlikely places. After all, what else could she do but move forward, even if stumbling along the way? However, stumbling is never simple, and Melisa felt this deeply as she sought help. Doors shut, voices fell silent, and judgmental glances were unavoidable. How does someone facing prejudice rebuild their dignity? Perhaps you felt this way too, in a place where every step seems to lead to further exclusion. But there's always that one person who sees beyond appearances, and Melisa was yet to meet hers. In her darkest moments, the strength of an expectant mother felt like an invisible miracle. Melisa felt it every time she touched her belly and thought about the future. She didn't know how, but she had an unshakable certainty: her daughter wouldn't pay for the judgment she herself was enduring. If you've ever faced challenges for the sake of someone you love, you know that kind of strength can move mountains. It was that strength that began to shift her trajectory. And then, like a ray of sunlight after days of storm, Margaret appeared. A baker known for her generosity and the softest bread in town. But Margaret wasn't just a provider of physical sustenance. By offering shelter and a sincere smile, she gave Melisa something not everyone sees as essential: hope. It was the first step in a long journey, and every crumb of hope seemed to light a new path forward. Living with Margaret was more than just finding shelter, it was a life school. Melisa learned more than just bread recipes. In the warm embrace of the bakery, Margaret shared lessons that the cold world outside would never teach. Life is like bread, she often said. It needs time and patience to grow, and even the hands that need it help shape something better. Melisa listened attentively, discovering a strength in those words that she hadn't realized she possessed. However, the world beyond the bakery walls was far less forgiving. Each trip to the market or walk through the small town felt like a trial by fire. People whispered, their stares sharp and sometimes cruel. To Melisa, being visibly pregnant felt like carrying a sign that read guilty in bold letters. Yet she often wondered, how many of those who judged her had ever faced a situation like hers? Margaret, understanding the weight of the accusations Melisa endured, began teaching her a simple yet powerful strategy: resilience. Don't give your attention to what doesn't nourish your soul, she would say. Margaret showed her how to turn judgment into fuel to move forward. If a loaf of bread didn't turn out right the first time, they would start again. It was a simple metaphor, but for Melisa, every loaf of bread they baked was a reminder that her past mistakes didn't define who she could become. As days passed, Melisa began to make small plans. Inspired by Margaret, she thought about ways to secure a better future for herself and her child. She started saving the meager tips she earned, dreaming of one day starting something of her own. Margaret, noticing the young woman's determination, offered her a practical piece of advice: always be grateful, but never settle for less than you deserve. It was a phrase Melisa repeated like a mantra during her darkest nights. One evening, as they were closing the bakery, Margaret handed Melisa an old recipe notebook. It's full of blank pages, she explained. Write your own recipes in here, not just for bread, but for life. Melisa held the notebook as if it were a treasure. It wasn't just an object, it was an opportunity to rewrite her story, to leave behind what society saw and build something new, on her own terms. The danger, however, wasn't limited to the judgmental stares and cutting words of the community. The streets could be treacherous, especially at night, and Margaret made a point of accompanying Melisa whenever possible. But there were nights when the journey was solitary. It was on one such night, returning from the bakery, that Melisa was nearly attacked by a stranger at a dark street corner. Her heart raced, but something within her screamed louder: the will to live. She ran and managed to escape, but that moment left an indelible mark on her soul. Despite everything, Melisa refused to give in. There was a fire within her that no judgment, hardship, or danger could extinguish. Margaret, recognizing this inner strength, began calling her lioness. It was this strength that Melisa carried with her each morning, even without knowing what the day would bring. What she didn't yet realize was that her challenges were far from over, and soon, her courage would be tested like never before. Melisa couldn't walk through town without feeling the weight of the stares. People talked, but never directly to her, they talked about her. Cutting remarks pierced the air like invisible arrows: so young and already pregnant, where were her parents? To the community, she was just another statistic, an easy target for judgment. But for Melisa, those stares were a bitter reminder that even the most familiar spaces could be cruel. The situation reached its peak one Sunday when a neighbor confronted her in front of the bakery. "Margaret, you shouldn't be protecting someone like her. She's a bad example for our daughters." The words stung, but Margaret calmly replied, "And what example do we set when we deny compassion?" Melisa, watching silently, felt a mixture of shame and admiration. For the first time, it seemed, someone was defending her with an open heart. Each day became a constant battle against veiled accusations. Once, Melisa tried visiting the local library to find books on entrepreneurship, a dream beginning to take shape. But even there, people whispered. Despite this, she forced herself to ignore it. After all, as Margaret often said, those who don't live their truth will always be prisoners of others' opinions. Her relationship with Margaret, however, also had its tense moments. The baker, who had already faced criticism for taking Melisa in, started losing customers. "I'm with you, my girl," Margaret said during a moment of discouragement, "but we need to prepare for the consequences." Melisa felt the heavy weight of guilt, but also saw something important. The right choices often come with sacrifices that not everyone is willing to make. In a moment of reflection, Melisa wrote in the recipe notebook Margaret had given her, "People's words are like yeast. They can grow and take over everything, but only if you let them." It was the first time she managed to turn verbal attacks into something positive. Writing became her refuge, a way to process her pain and rediscover resilience. The challenges, however, weren't limited to words. One night, while Margaret was away, a group of youths broke into the bakery and scattered flour everywhere, as if trying to turn the place into a symbol of chaos. Melisa cried at the sight, but Margaret simply sighed and said, "If we give up now, they win." Together, they cleaned up everything before dawn, renewing their commitment to keep going. Despite all the difficulties, Melisa began to notice something curious. Some people in the community were starting to change their attitudes. A young mother, previously silent, started greeting her on the street. An older man, a loyal bakery customer, left a note of encouragement. These were small gestures, but they meant a lot. Melisa still had a long journey ahead, but she began to understand that even amidst hostility, small sparks of hope could emerge. As time went on, Melisa realized she couldn't continue living under the shadow of judgment. Inspired by Margaret's advice, she decided to take control of her narrative. She started with small steps, learning to manage the bakery's finances and developing new recipes to bring customers back. It was more than just work, it was a reclamation of an identity that many had tried to erase. One night, while reflecting on her daughter's future, Melisa had an idea: to open a cafe that would be more than just a business. It would be a space of warmth and belonging. "Olivia," she whispered, gently touching her belly, "this will be our home and your legacy." The idea felt far-fetched, almost impossible, but Melisa knew that big dreams begin with small steps. She decided to educate herself, learning everything she could about management and hospitality. The recipe notebook, once used for venting her emotions, became an improvised business plan. In it, Melisa wrote down ideas for the future cafe: homemade cakes, afternoon tea, and most importantly, a welcoming environment for anyone in need of comfort. "Think about what people need, not just what they want," Margaret often reminded her, helping Melisa transform dreams into actionable strategies. To raise funds, Melisa began selling cakes and pastries at a small local market. At first, sales were slow, but soon customers returned, drawn by the flavor and the dedication evident in every bite. "This bread has soul," remarked one loyal customer. Melisa laughed at the comment, but deep down, she knew it was true. The hard work carried her essence, her story. Margaret, ever the tireless mentor, made sure to prepare Melisa for the challenges ahead. Starting a business is like raising a child. It takes patience, courage, and many sleepless nights, she cautioned. Despite the difficulties, Melisa felt she was building something lasting. Every penny saved, every recipe perfected, was a brick in the foundation of a future that finally felt possible. After months of saving and planning, Melisa managed to rent a small space for her cafe. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. She and Margaret spent days painting the walls, choosing simple furniture, and ensuring that every detail radiated warmth and hospitality. When they finally hung a sign with the name Café Olivia, Melisa cried. It wasn't just a place, it was a symbol of everything she had overcome. The cafe opened its doors with a special touch. Every customer received a small note with a message of encouragement. "Never let others' judgment dim your light," read one of them. This simple yet powerful gesture touched the community. The cafe became not just a meeting spot, but a sanctuary, a place where Melisa began to rewrite her story, this time with her own hands. 10 years had passed since that night when Melisa was expelled from her home. Now, as the owner of Café Olivia, she had transformed her pain into purpose. But the emotional scars never completely faded. On quiet nights, when Olivia played in the cafe's hallways, Melisa found herself thinking of her parents. Did they miss her? Did they still believe that the family's honor was more important than love? The answer came on an ordinary morning when Melisa saw her mother walk through the cafe door. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The woman who once carried herself with authority now appeared smaller, almost frail. "Melisa." She couldn't finish the sentence, her words caught in a web of years of silence and pain. Melisa, in turn, felt a whirlwind of emotions. The woman who had cast her out was now standing there, asking for something she had never sought before: forgiveness. They sat at one of the cafe's tables, where Melisa often counseled young people facing difficult situations. But at that moment, she was simply a daughter listening to the trembling voice of her mother. I thought I was protecting the family, but I ended up destroying ours. The words were heavy but also brought a sense of release. For Melisa, it wasn't about forgetting the past, but about finding a way to move forward, even with the visible cracks. Reconciliation wasn't instantaneous. Melisa knew that forgiveness is a process, not a sudden decision. She decided that Olivia would meet her grandmother, but on her own terms. The first visit was filled with tension, but something magical happened when Olivia, with her innocent curiosity, asked, "Do you like carrot cake?" "My mom makes the best." It was a simple moment, yet it began to weave together the torn threads of their relationship. Margaret, as always, stood by Melissa's side, offering her invaluable advice. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what was done to you, it's about freeing your heart. Those words resonated deeply with Melisa, especially as she saw her mother, in her hesitant way, trying to become part of her life again. The cafe, already a symbol of new beginnings, became the stage for a new chapter in their family story. One day, as they worked together to prepare a surprise birthday party for Olivia at the cafe, Melisa and her mother found themselves laughing over a mix-up with the decorations. It was light, natural laughter, as if, for a moment, the past didn't exist. Melisa realized something important: love, even if delayed, was still love. And sometimes, that was enough to start anew. At that birthday party, watching Olivia blow out her candles surrounded by everyone who had supported her, Melisa felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Her mother, now part of the family she had chosen, held Margaret's hand in a silent gesture of gratitude. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Melisa felt there was room for healing and, perhaps, even a little peace. Melissa's story shows us that even in the most challenging situations, there is a choice: to surrender to judgment or to use exclusion as fuel for transformation. How many times have you doubted your own worth because of what others said? Maybe today is the day to rewrite your story, just like Melisa did. What if you could turn your pain into strength and your setbacks into lessons? What's stopping you from taking that first step? Whatever your challenge may be, remember, change begins when you decide that you deserve more than the life you've been offered so far. If this story resonated with you, why not share your reflections in the comments? How would you handle the difficulties Melisa faced? And more importantly, what will the next chapter of your journey be? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep learning and being inspired by stories like this one. After all, the next great transformation could start right now, with you.